Hello, beloved brothers and sisters, church members of the Orange and Anaheim SDA churches, and all friends that are along with us on the journey. I want to welcome you once again. We are here for another of our book over videos, and can you believe it, friends? We are beginning the book of Numbers. We have passed the midway point in the Pentateuch. That's the 5 books that Jewish tradition holds are called the Book of Moses. I actually, in preparation for this, I got curious about the word Pentateuch. I knew that penta is the prefix for 5. Turns out in the Greek language, tukos can be like a container, or it has a wide semantic range, but it kind of means like the container that holds 5 scrolls is the word Pentateuch. So, fascinating. So Leviticus was the midway point. We have now gone through it, and now we are kind of on the far side of the Pentateuch books for the book of Numbers. Book of Numbers is named that because it has lots of numerical statistics in it. You're going to see a census commanded in chapter 1, and the details of which follow through chapter 4. And then late in the book, in chapter 26, there's another census. So it's almost like it's bookended with 2 censuses. So that kind of makes sense. In the Jewish language, Hebrew language, it's called Bemidbar, which means in the wilderness, which comes from chapter 1, verse 1. I think all of the names of the first 5 books get their name from a phrase that's in 1 verse 1. And that's an appropriate title as well. In fact, you could say it's a better or more comprehensive title because this is continued goings-on in the wilderness. And in fact, of the 5 books, Numbers covers the longest year span of any of the 5 books. We'll explain why here in a moment. So we already had the first phase in which they were in the wilderness, that year in which they entered into covenant with God. They were released from Egypt. They received the law at the base of Mount Sinai, and they received the instructions for building the tabernacle. All that stuff took place in the book of Exodus. And now this next phase, they resumed the journey from Mount Sinai to, by the end of the book, the plains of Moab on the border with Canaan, preparing to enter it and conquer it. Now, due to the rebellion, due to the Jewish people becoming in breach of their covenant relationship, there is a long delay, and it ends up being a 38-year period that the book of Numbers covers. You may remember 40 total years from the Exodus to entering in the book of Joshua, but Numbers covers 38 of those 40 years. And so we're going to find lots of different types of writing, many more stories than Leviticus had. In fact, the literary style in Numbers is more diverse than any other book in the Pentateuch, and one study Bible I was reading said even more literary styles than any other single book of the Bible. I couldn't believe it. I've never thought of Numbers as such a diverse book, but it's got narrative story, it's got law giving, it's got census reporting, as we mentioned, it's got blessings in it, it's got prayers, it's got diplomatic correspondences, it's got poetry, it's got prophecy, it's got what the study Bible called itinerary, maybe like specific plans going forward. And so just a rich, diverse book. I look forward to experiencing some of the richness of it with you. So 3 major phases in Numbers. It starts out that they're still at the foot of Mount Sinai and they're preparing to depart. Then they go from Sinai to Kadesh, which is the place of their rebellion and the delay. And then they go from Kadesh to the plains of Moab, and there are more preparations done at the plains of Moab in the last several chapters there. There are strong themes in the book of Numbers, very high among which is the presence and the interest that God has for his covenant people. There's much organization taking place in the book of Numbers. Instead of just being kind of a disorganized people, like we talked about, there are 2 censuses in here. There is the arrangement of the camp, and there's also the arrangement of the people into an army that is able to conquer its enemies. So we're going to start to see some vertical structure in terms of the military and things like that. Also a big theme in Numbers is that regulation governs many aspects of life. After coming out of Egypt, where they were controlled by their oppressors, they come out into the wilderness and it's like the Wild West for them. Well, God talks about organized regulations for many, many aspects of life, including things like cleanliness, how to stay clean. We know nowadays, because of germ theory, it's incredibly important to stay clean, and so we can make sense of a lot of the very strict cleanliness rules that it has there. but also, continued rituals for the sanctuary services. Holiness was very important to God, and all of this is for the survival of the people. God is taking a people out of one land and bringing them into another land to be a different type of people than the surrounding nations. As we've already alluded to, frequent and repeated problems are recorded, and those are treated seriously. We see some judgments in Numbers that are harsher than we would be comfortable with. Many people would like to kind of sweep that under the rug. Maybe for that reason, Numbers is one of the less read books of the Old Testament by Christians. A lot of those things are not too pleasing for us. But those judgments are affirmed in the New Testament. Jesus, just 2 verses before the sweet, sweet verse of John 3:16, in John 3:14, Jesus tells Nicodemus, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, and that is a reference to Numbers chapter 21 there. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, how can I start the verse without finishing it? So must the Son of Man be lifted up. Also, Paul refers to the unfaithfulness of the Israelites in the wilderness. This is in 1 Corinthians 10, and the judgment that came upon them. And he says, this is a warning so that we will not stray in a similar manner. So the judgments of Numbers are affirmed in the New Testament. We affirm it as well. And even while it's a struggle for us to accept some of the stuff, it's certainly an easier struggle than they had living through it, definitely, no? You also get the very interesting case of Balaam in the Bible. Balaam was Moab's response to the Israelites coming toward them. They wanted Balaam to curse Israel. I guess they had view that the local gods could be swayed or affected by a curse from another god. But Balaam's intended curse, he was going to get paid for this, gets overwhelmed by God's Spirit, and he cannot help but pronounce a blessing on them. And that's the message that we want to get through Numbers more than the judgments is the forgiveness and the blessing. Because despite these repeated rebellions, despite the judgments and deaths that take place, Israel does not cease being God's covenant people. Even though the people, in a very strong way, in Kadesh there, chapter, forgive me, I don't know the chapter, I'll put a base on here. Even though they rebel against God and violate the covenant, God does not abrogate the covenant with them. So, a couple other significant things in the book of Numbers. Toward the end of it, you get the deaths of Aaron and Miriam, Moses' brother and sister, and you kind of see the beginning of the change of the generation. The old guard is dying away, and a new generation needs to come up. It leads to leadership issues and questions. Are we still going to be able to move forward without the old guard being there? And also, sadly, we see Moses' major sin that ends up keeping him from entering the promised land himself. And that's a sad tale there toward the end of the book of Numbers. So it is often considered a harsh book, but people need discipline, right? Every parent knows that a small child needs discipline to learn the right, and then the parent can be more gentle and more understanding and communicative. There is a pleasant surprise, though, in the book of Numbers. One of the sweetest, sweet passages. Many people are aware of this passage with this language, but they might not even know that it comes from Numbers, is the sweet priestly blessing of Numbers chapter 6. I'm not going to recite it right now because we'll get to it in chapter 6, but there's beautiful music that has been put to it, and we'll share that when the time comes. But I hope that this book is a blessing for you. I hope that we will learn the intended lessons, both of the seriousness of sin and avoiding that, the importance of cooperating with God and being in covenant with Him. We don't deny that God is a God of judgment. We have judgments in the New Testament too. The big judgment for the wicked is coming, but we choose the much better path of being in relationship with God, living under His blessing. I pray a blessing for you and your families as we continue journeying together through the Bible and here immediately through the book of Numbers. God bless you all. I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Blessings to your friends and families, and we hope to see you at church sometime soon. We're so glad to be back in the sanctuary, both at Anaheim and at Orange. God bless you. Bye.